have Lesego Maforah from SAMRO, who will be telling us a bit about what SAMRO has been considering with AI. Here you go. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks, James. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thanks to everyone at SACO for putting this whole this event together. I think it's a vital conversation that we should be having as society in general. So my presentation is really going to be focused around AI and music, and eventually when it pops up, but I'll start anyway and it'll catch up with me. But primarily, cool, let's just skip 2 slides and go to the there we go. So, in terms of AI, and I think the discussions have proven that there's positives and negative aspects around AI, and I think from a positive perspective, there's 4 key areas that I touch on. One is innovation and creativity, because I think what AI can do is to help the thinking process. It can't think for us, it can't create for us, but it can help us in creativity and in sparking creativity within our own minds. And I think in the context of South Africa, where we have so much disparity, I think it can be an interesting tool in terms of bridging a lot of the divides that happen: education, digital, and skills. And then we obviously have music. For us, music is central. But what you realize is that there's a lot of young creators and seasoned creators who are struggling in terms of getting their music circulated, in understanding how they can increase their reach and increase their product acceptance in the market. And AI can do that, and that can be done through algorithms. It can be done through partnerships with particular DSPs. So there's a lot of scope in terms of leveraging AI to advance careers for South African artists and for the South African culture. And then we've got efficiency in production. And I think here it really goes around the creative process and moving from your idea around a song and producing a final product. And when you look at what it took in the past to be able to put a song out, it took an extraordinary amount of work, effort, skills and resources that weren't really available to everyone. So with the democratization of the internet, knowledge and digital technologies, it becomes much easier for artists to move from the start point to the end point of their product. And then we've got data-driven insights, and I think this is really around, similarly to what we're talking about in terms of the whole Amapiano conversation, is that what we can do is make sure that the music that comes from South Africa is branded as such, right? So we don't get this discrepancy in recognition of what is essentially our own cultural IP. And we've had the discussions. If you look at TikTok, our colleagues in Nigeria is like, no, we bought this thing, and so there's a whole social discussion. But I think when it comes to value trickling down to our creators, it requires that we put systems in place that allow us to be able to identify content that comes out of our own communities and make sure that it cannot be, for lack of a better word, plagiarized. To make sure that that content has a particularly South African accent and is recognized globally as South African. Next slide, please. Then we've got, obviously, some of the things that a lot of the conversation has been around the negative aspects of AI, and that one is around job displacement. And I think when we look at job displacement, creatives suffer to a greater or lesser extent, but when you look at repetitive jobs and discussions around automation and the AI do have a real present risk towards job creation or jobs in the sector. But also when you look at the levels of education in South Africa, the transition from labor-based work and into more digital-based work is becoming difficult for a lot of our citizens. And it's either we are going to leverage AI technology to make that transition better, or we're going to exacerbate the gap. The next is around the cultural and creative dilution, and we touched on that previously. And that's around, and we've had discussions around cultural appropriation. We've seen that a lot. If you look at the textile industry, if you look a few years ago, brands like Gucci were using, for example, the Sishashwe motifs in, and not even, what more can I say? They were not attributing that to the source. And I think there was a lot of loss in terms of recognition around what for us has been a staple creative item for a lot of our citizens, and it didn't get the recognition that it required. And I think these are some of the things that we want to guard against. And then there's IP concerns, and this is around making sure that content that's generated is attributed to the right creator. And I think that's the real thing. One of the problems that we have structurally as economies is that we have what we call trickle-down economics, where you have major concentrations of capital and ultimately that then flows down to the man on the street. It doesn't work. What we really need to do is make sure that we sort of flatten it, right? So when you create something, there must be an ecosystem that allows you to generate income from it without having to run through a whole host of other gatekeepers, if we can call it that. So we need to be, AI should be leveraged to democratize creativity, employment, and economic sustainability. And then the last one is about access and inequality. And when there was a comment earlier on today about putting tablets into schools. Putting tablets into schools does not make kids more technologically advanced, it does not make them smarter. Content in those tablets does, and the way that we teach our kids. So it's what are we putting out there, not the devices, but the knowledge that we want to transmit to our people. Next slide. So key policy considerations here, I think we've touched on a lot, and I won't stick on this for much long, but we've got 5 areas that I think are fundamental. The one is intellectual property rights. So from a regulatory perspective, we need to make sure that whatever steps are taken in terms of governance of AI needs to make sure that we safeguard and make sure that there is requisite consideration for intellectual property rights, how we generate those, but also making it a lot easier for people to register those IP rights. Because right now, to register IP is a very complex process. For you to, if you create something on a platform and it goes viral, and someone takes it and monetizes it, it's very hard for you to come back and then say, well, that was my idea. I think the Vodacom case is one in point, and hopefully the brother gets his billions, because I think he deserves them. And then, you know, there's issues around access and equity is not equality. We sort of confuse the two often. We need to make sure that whatever regulatory framework we put in place must not be at the expense of the poor or the people who don't have access to the knowledge, the platforms, but also the tools to be able to access those. So that's vital for us. Then we need, you know, there's issues around education and training, and I think specifically from a SAMRO's perspective, we spend a lot of money making sure that we can create opportunities for artists to understand contracts, to understand the legislation around the craft that they work in, and empowering them to make informed decisions. How many artists do we talk about who died poor but had hits after hit after hit, but they have nothing to their name when they're done? They just have a legacy, and they live in the memories and minds of the people that consume that music, instead of benefiting from it. And then of course there was issues around data and privacy and protection, and then this is, at least in South Africa, we've moved here through Poppy and Popia. There are safeguards in place, but even those, there have been gaps that have been identified. I think if you look at what the information regulator released, you know, around spam calling, the reason why you're being spam called is because it's an algorithm. They don't attach it to you, they don't identify you as a number, but that gap is now being closed. Next slide, please. So I think from our SAMRO ecosystem, AI is really around increasing royalty collection and then passing that back down to creators. So from our perspective, it's really around 3 core areas: enhanced identification and tracking, content recognition technologies, and then also around the automating of administrative tasks. So enhancing identification and tracking is particularly important, especially when we look at licensees, what we call users. Now, these are the people that use music and use it to supplement their actual work. Right? So, for example, in retail, when you walk in a retail store, the music that you hear, they actually have to pay for that music, so that we can then pay that to creators. So we need to, AI can be useful from a hardware perspective, if you pair the AI with hardware to be able to have robust recognition systems that allow people, that allow us as CMOs to be able to identify and then pay creators what's due to them. And then, of course, automating administrative tasks. That's really around the process around recognizing who it is, capturing that data, and then paying out our artists. Next slide, please. So, in terms of from an AI perspective, and a lot of these things we've touched on, but mine is really specific to music. There's issues around smart contracts and blockchain, data analysis for fair distribution, and then dispute resolution. I won't go too deep into that because I know my time is running out. Next slide, please. So I think from what are the challenges and considerations we need to look at? So I think AI systems must comply with data protection regulations. They must safeguard the privacy of creators and users. Transparency, we need to understand how they work, because I think that obfuscation around how do these things add up. For example, there was a clip around Snoop Dogg saying he did 12 million streams but only got $47,000. Doesn't seem to add up. So I think there really needs to be work done in the sector around identifying how we can get clarity on these issues and how these algorithms work. And then obviously we need to, there's the issues around the ethical components, especially around copyright law and not infringing on the rights of music creators. And then there's access and equity. Everybody must be able to benefit from this. It cannot be for the few, it has to be for the many. And then, so I think my presentation is a bit long. I'm going to end it right here because I go deep into some other aspects. But I want to say thank you for everyone and to everyone who's contributed to the conversation.
So it sounds like SAMRO is really deeply ready in the AI question and working harder. We look forward to the future education programs you're going to be running. Lesego. But it's true. We do need increased education on how AI can be used and how we can impact it in the industry. Our next presenter is a lawyer, a gender equity